I'm David Smith. I'm president of the Forage Center, and I welcome you all here this evening for our event, Peacebuilding and Humanitarianism at a Crossroads. We are a 501c3 corporation, a not-for-profit based in Rockville, Maryland. We've been operating for 12 years, and we focus on humanitarian peacebuilding education, but from the experiential standpoint. So we run simulations. Most of our simulations, the last 6 or 7 years, we've run out of a site that we have in Garrett County, Maryland. Generally, every spring we run a simulation. This year, we decided to do something different. This being 1 year out from many of the most severe reductions in force that were implemented by the Trump administration, at USAID, at USIP, which has a special meaning for me because I was at USIP for a number of years, and other organizations that supported the development, humanitarian, and peace building space. We thought it would be great to kind of gather a group of individuals. Many of you are seasoned in your fields, but many of you are starting your careers. And to get a sense of where things are, to bring some individuals in, and we'll have a conversation about kind of the state of things, talking about career pathways, some things we can look forward to in the future. Before I introduce our panel, I wanted to thank people that are here and introduce a few people. I want to thank, there's a lot of work in an event like this, and this is really part one of an event. So this is the networking reception. Obviously, we're networking, we're getting to know each other. Some of you might have participated in the career bingo. But tomorrow we have an event that's online that starts at 7:30 Eastern Time, goes to 4:30. And that'll be 8 different presenters talking about career development in peace building, humanitarianism, and development. But not building your resume as much as kind of talking about big picture items, looking at AI, looking at kind of the new space that's been created. So I welcome you all to join that. If you haven't signed up for that, that's also open enrollment. We have about 280 people signed up for that right now. You can see Emily Hall about that, and she was out in the signing you in. So I welcome you to do that. So without further ado, I want to thank some people, including Emily Hall. Emily, I think, is sitting outside, or maybe Emily is in here. No, Emily is our administrative manager, and she put a lot of this together. I really appreciate the work that Emily has put into doing this. So a lot of the communication you've received is from Emily. I want to thank Naomi Davis, who is co-facilitating with me today. Naomi is a alum of the Carter School, former student of mine, which I'm most proud of. Also works for the Forage Center. And she's based in Virginia, and maybe at some point you can talk a little bit about the work that you're doing. And she's monitoring with me. Vivian Rigo is our Forage Fellow. This year, the Forage Center has fellows every year that join us to support the work that we're doing over a period of time. She participated in our simulation last year that we held in Western Maryland. She is now graduating with a master's degree in Peace and Conflict Studies from Rutgers University. So we want to congratulate Vivian on her good work, and glad that she came down all the way from New Jersey, came down to this from New Jersey. And there are other board members. Paz Mogget was a member of our board, is a member of our board. She was here, but she had to leave early. So I want to thank her and the board for supporting this. I also want to thank the Carter School. Carter School is co-sponsoring this event, and Charisse Cardenas is here from the Carter School. If you're thinking about this is a time to go back to school, well, maybe this is. So talk to people from the Carter School. Some of you are Carter School alum, as I am, so I'm glad that you're here. But most importantly, I want to thank the Biosophical Institute, and Ellen Ensel is here, who is president of the board of the Biosophical Institute. I want you to come up, Ellen, if you can. So all of these events, people have events and they do things, and the money just doesn't appear. We wish that it does, it doesn't. So there are philanthropy, there are foundations, there are organizations out and about there who support peace building work, and the Biosophical Institute is one of them. And I've gone to the Biosophical Institute before. They supported a book that I wrote several years ago, and I want to thank them for being here, having the faith to support an event like this, finding that it's important, supporting tonight's event, and then supporting tomorrow's event. So, Ellen, I want to pass it on to you if you want to say a few words.
Thank you, David. I'm delighted to be here representing the Biosophical Institute, and the Institute is delighted to be able to support this kind of an event, this kind of work. It comes at a critical time. It's really important. It fits into the Institute's mission, which includes development of peace and character education, also building community. So we are networking, building community, and we are looking at all of the different things that that we have to do to create this peace building future. David, you didn't mention that you and I worked together at, so we worked together at the U.S. Institute of Peace. Well, okay, you know about that. But I was there for 22 years, and it allowed me to put the kinds of things in the mission statement of the Biosophical Institute. It allowed me to put some of that into practice at the United States Institute of Peace. I just wanted to mention a couple of things about funding opportunities. So David mentioned that we are one of the organizations that try to support what other organizations do in this, in this field. We have other funding opportunities, checking out our website, which we are revamping, and I think there's new information about it. We have grants and scholarships available for organizations and for individuals. So check out and see what we have, and I'll mention just a couple of things that we have supported in the past. David's book, as he mentioned.
Which there are copies out if you want to look at it, there are copies out.
So David's book, we were one of the groups supporting the Encyclopedia of Peace, which you may have found in your university library. We also supported over a number of years, and this gives you an idea that the Biosophical Institute is committed to maintaining funding for something that we think is really important. This was education, curriculum, created by the Forgiveness Institute working in Northern Ireland. Over a course of 10 years, from K to 12, they created curricula and a program to help with the reconciliation that was required in Northern Ireland. So that was one project that I think we're pretty proud of, having given them money for all of that. So a number of different things. Please check out the website, and I have several business cards. I'm happy to give you a copy of my business card. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen, for being here, support of Biosophical Institute, and of course your friendship. So thank you. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I do want to remind everyone that we are recording this panel discussion, which we plan on posting on our YouTube channel. And we will honor, we asked you when you came in, if you wear a blue tag, name tag, you're fine with being filmed and so forth. If you have a red tag, you're not comfortable with that, so we will honor that and make sure that you're obscured when we get to that point. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a discussion. We've invited 4 individuals who represent a range of backgrounds, a range of perspectives, and looking at the field to talk about, well, what's going on now, and maybe to offer some insights. We now have insights from over a year, if you think about it, that things happened back in March, right, for the most part, and people's worlds were turned upside down. careers were undermined, very hard decisions had to be made. And as a result, a lot of deep thinking took place, deep reflection. And the individuals on the panel are been part of that thinking and reflection, and thinking about how these various fields, this peace, humanitarian development nexus, these three fields are related to each other in one way or another. And I know with my own students at the Carter School, I have students who graduate and they aspire to USAID, or they aspire to go overseas and to work in a conflict zone, or they even aspire to do domestic work, right? So you have some of the same backgrounds and the skill sets. People are looking for kind of work to make the difference in the world, right? And a lot of that opportunity was halted for a lot of people. I wouldn't say it was taken away; it was halted. And now many of us in the room are trying to figure out, well, what are the options of what we can be doing? So let me say a little bit about our panelists, and then we'll go for a discussion for about an hour, 45 minutes, an hour. We will take questions at the end. So if you're thinking about something that you would like to ask, then kind of keep it in front of mind. You have an opportunity to do that. Joe O'Connor, as to my immediate right, is the CEO of Career Pivot. Joe's professional background covers a decade of providing training and change management support as a contract with various federal agencies, including state, Army, Navy, and USAID. Before that, he served as a Peace Corps volunteer. I imagine he's not the only Peace Corps volunteer in the room. In Albania, where he focused on youth development activities. And I've been following Joe for a while. Career Pivot is something that a colleague of his started, and it kind of came to Joe. And I know that that's been a lot of the go-to for the development community, at least through LinkedIn and online and so forth. And it's become a really important kind of starting point for people. For the last 2 decades, Sepada Kevashad has worked on organizational and structural change, leading multidisciplinary and multicultural teams in the United States. And we're glad that Sepada is here. She has brought diverse teams together to jointly envision different alternative outcomes. And she is currently a senior advisor at Cambridge Global Advisors. So I'm glad that she is here. Saul, I'm going to mispronounce your last name again. Pronounce it for me. Ujoa, thank you. Saul Ujoa is a policy communications professional with over 10 years of experience translating complex policy issues into clear, timely messaging for policymakers and public audiences alike. They have worked across crisis and rapid response contexts, supporting humanitarian advocacy during active conflicts, coordinating emergency communications, and managing speaker networks. They are currently the Rapid Response Advocacy Manager for the Partnership for Public Service. So we are so glad to have them with us. Liz Hume is a conflict management expert and has more than 25 years of experience in senior leadership positions in bilateral, multilateral institutions and NGOs. She has extensive experience in policy and advocacy, and she is well known as the face of the Alliance for Peacebuilding as the executive director. So we're glad that she is here. And then Naomi Davis, who is co-moderating this with me, is a strategic peace builder with the mission of building thriving communities. She holds a master's in peace and conflict resolution from the Carter School and has supported humanitarian aid education through the Forage Center. So I've had the privilege of working with her in the Forage Center. In her role as a policy analyst for the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development, she continues to champion basic needs as foundational to a peaceful society. So I thought before we would start for questions, I would ask each panelist, and then after that, then Naomi will start off the questions, to say a little bit more about their work and really how it informs why they are here and what they can offer this evening. So if you each can take a couple minutes, we'll start with Joe and work down there, and then Naomi will start the questions. And like I said, at the end, we'll have questions that everyone can ask. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. My name's Joe O'Connor. So I do have a day job. I'm a training specialist at a USPTO project. And I have actually, over the last year, having lost my job at USAID, I did take over Career Pivot from Wyan Voda, who was huge in that space. And really, that's like the mission that I care about, right? Is helping people connect with resources and guidance. And um, it's always been what I've been trying to do with my career, right? So I was a Peace Corps volunteer. I actually didn't learn about Peace Corps until I was in graduate school. So I really appreciate anybody who learned about it beforehand. I went to graduate school at the Sam Nunn School in Atlanta at Georgia Tech. And I had a Foreign Service Institute internship there. And that's kind of how all of this kicked off with me. But I've always been really keen on like training and connecting people with resources and empowering them. And that's basically wherever I am in my jobs of the 38 that I've had in my life. That's been the focus. We can get more into that later, but I'll pass it along.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sapide Kevanshad. I was actually at USAID until last September when they dismantled our organization. I was a Foreign Service officer at USAID for about 25 years. And I basically started out as a technical person working on democracy, rights, governance. I spent a lot of my career working on conflict and post-conflict situations. But as I actually got further into my career, one of my last jobs was I was our mission director in Nepal for about 4 years. And then my final job was when I was the head of our, what they call the human capital talent management, because I was in charge of all of the agencies, basically human resources functions. And so one of the things for me was that as I learned more and more about just development, the more I realized how much the organizations, the processes, the policies, all the foundations that make the technical work possible was just very important. So towards the end, that's what I was getting into. And now for the past year, I'm actually trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. I'm actually in some ways in the same place as you are. The past year has given me this incredible privilege and opportunity of really reflecting on, several decades of work all across the world and to try to figure out how I can actually provide service, how I can be helpful for this next stage of my career.
Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here. I'm Saul, as it was shared. I spent, I think, just under 5 years at a global nonprofit called the International Rescue Committee. And I was on a global policy and advocacy team based here in DC, was working very closely with our country programs and trying to translate kind of operational realities through two different lenses to the policymakers here in DC, then also to all of our donors and to the public in general. And I came to this work mostly because I am from Western Michigan originally. I am the first in my family to go to college, and I wanted to always be able to explain to my family back home of all of these things are happening around the world, and it's important to you for XYZ reasons. And I figured if I can't explain this complexity to my family who didn't have the privilege of going to college or having these amazing experiences abroad or elsewhere, then like what was I really doing? So when I was let go from my role at the IRC, the end of 2024, I was hurled into the void, so to speak, and only landed my job with a partnership public service 3 weeks ago. So I was in a very similar boat for a very, very, very long time. And I'm happy to share any nuggets of wisdom I might have. Thanks.
Hi. So my background is I started off as a lawyer, and I'm still a lawyer, but I was really doing law stuff back then. One of my first international jobs was going to work for the OSCE. So I was seconded by the State Department to the OSCE in Bosnia right after the war. And I was working on election fraud issues and how do we implement the Dayton Peace Accords. Then I was there for 3 years. I went to Kosovo right after the war, doing the same stuff. Then 9/11 happened. I went to Afghanistan. And one of the things I found is that we had these huge missions and all this work, and we were always going after the conflict. So I wanted to work on prevention, and I came back to DC. I was working with the U.S. Agency for International Development, and I helped start up this Office of Conflict Management and Mitigation there. And I used to say it was like trying to turn the Titanic, in terms of changing the way we think, right? Because, it was like 2/3 of the countries that USAID was working in either were in conflict, sliding into conflict, coming out of conflict. And we, it was still like, okay, here's your development package. And I was shocked at how hard it was to get people to think about prevention. And so I, in about 2015, I started working at the Alliance for Peacebuilding, and I wanted to take all of this work that I had done and how do we change policy? We know a lot now about what works, what doesn't work. And we had a great win with the Global Fragility Act. We have the Women, Peace and Security Act. We did some great stuff. And then in 2025, everything kind of imploded. And I'm fortunate that at AFP, I get to get up every day and think, how do we rebuild? How do we reform? How do we transform? And I can talk more about that later.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, everyone. Before we dig into the problems and the solutions and all of your great wisdom, can you describe where we're at in this moment? Where are we right now? What's the context that you're seeing? I'll start with Saul.
So I'll admit that over the course of the past year, I became very disillusioned and very wore down with the prospect of kind of applying for any kinds of jobs in the international development or humanitarian world, because I wasn't finding any roles, right? And and I say that mostly just to say that I've been quite disconnected from the state of play in the field as a whole, because I've been so dead set and focused on how do I get out of this and find out whatever the next step is for me personally. But I can say that at a very, very high level, I'm seeing a shift away, and this isn't going to be something groundbreaking for any of you here, I think, but a shift away from donors in the global north kind of moving money to the global south, and that's kind of how the power flows. I think we're likely going to see something that's a bit more horizontal, a bit more ground up, not entirely, but somewhat. So I think for me, that's kind of the extent of what I can say about the state of play, and I'm curious to see what the others have to say.
I would say the state of play is in flux. So 2025, there was a major crash, trying to, stop the bleeding as much as we could from development assistance. But, it was bad. However, lots of programs were cut, but there's actually some programs that are being quietly turned back on. We try to keep that quiet. And also to know that it's not just in the US, right? UK, the development assistance, the report just came out about official development assistance is down the most it's ever been, and that's globally. At the same time, $2.7 trillion in 2024 was spent globally on military. That's record breaking. At the same time, and that number is going to go up for many reasons, we all know what they are. At the same time, global violent conflict started hitting record-breaking numbers about 2015. We've blown past what it was in for World War II. So, that was one of the things that we had gone to Congress in actually 2015 and said, hey, what we're doing isn't working. Let's rethink this. Let's do a strategy that reflects what's happening. And we had bipartisan support. Lindsey Graham was our first co-sponsor. Secretary Rubio was our second one, Senator Coons. And we had, the only person who voted against this bill was Rand Paul. And it was only because he didn't like the fact that they were gonna take money, and anything that has money he didn't like. But that's it. These are bipartisan issues. Women, peace, and security, bipartisan issues. And so that's, whatever, what happened, and I don't even think the White House meant for what happened to happen, and there's reasons for that too. You can read the Vanity Fair article, I guess. But that bipartisan support is still there. We're up on the Hill all the time. And thinking about, okay, and it doesn't matter who wins the House or the Senate, we are working right now to rebuild and transform, and we're gonna make it bipartisan. And we are going to rebuild what was working, what was not working. We want that to stay broken. And we're gonna be working how we transform. And so, and one of our big pieces is, how do we center and prioritize conflict prevention and peace building? Shockingly enough, it wasn't. And, I also talk about USAID. I was one of its big critics in terms of, the earmarks and how you would go into a country, and USAID's own strategies would say, in Bangladesh, this is what's driving conflict, this is what's driving violent extremism, human rights, corruption. Okay, we'll look at your strategy and your budget, and okay, 90%, 95% is going to health and education. Like, nobody wants to be the jerk in the room to say no, but it has to be rebalanced. And they're like, here's your $500,000 to work on conflict programs. So that's some of, and that's, a congressional issue too with earmarks. So we're really working to try to rebuild in a bipartisan way a practical, fit for purpose strategy that is both political, diplomacy, assistance, and so how we can really start tackling some of these, this record-breaking crisis. It is not lost on me that the United States now is, and at other times, is putting, the cause of some of this. And that's why it's so important that we amplify our message and get everyday people in the United States involved, and that we demand better from our leaders on these issues. So, not to be the glass half full person, but, there is a lot of work that's going on, and, there's still work to happen, so.
So what I would say is that we are at a period of change, which is causing a lot of stress, obviously, for a lot of people. But I would ask you to actually look back a little bit. And if you extend the timeline that you're thinking about in terms of where we are right now at this moment, we have actually been changing already. The world around us had been changing already. US had been changing already. The development field had been changing already. The peace building field had been changing already. The humanitarian field had been changing already. And what had been happening is that part of it, we hadn't recognized how much it had already been changing. And in certain ways, we had continued to do the same thing we had been doing because of the inertia we had. In my field in development, my last job, in Nepal as the mission director, one of the things I kept thinking about really is, why are we still doing the same type of things? A lot of what we were doing wasn't really timely, fit for purpose anymore. Because what really has been happening for the past couple of decades is that United States has been changing internally, and United States has been changing in terms of where it sits in the world. And the rest of the world has been changing in relationship to other countries in the South developing world and in relationship to the developed world. And I think the way we have been doing things, which is, we are the development assistance people, we are the doers, we are the people who are going to provide the technical assistance. A lot of it had actually changed because a lot of the technical expertise in every field that we had been providing for a couple of decades wasn't necessarily needed in the same way anymore. Because the other countries really had a lot of this technical expertise. They had the smarts, they knew exactly how to do these things. And the direction that we really needed to move towards was one of cooperation, collaboration, joint problem solving. And so what you see right now, unfortunately, is this really kind of sharp break that is stressing a lot of us out, including me, because, my agency really did go through a lot of turmoil. But I think what this shows us is that a lot of change was already happening. The context had already been changing dramatically. Institutions don't catch up, unfortunately, the way they need to, as quickly as they need to. That's just the nature of institutions. So I think the context we are in right now is one where I think we would all benefit from really sitting down and absorbing what happened, why it happened, really seeing the world as it is right now, not the way we want it to be or we necessarily, think it was. But it also provides us this incredible opportunity because sometimes when there's a sharp break, it really forces you to start changing your perspectives, thinking about things differently, seeing things differently. So I think we are at this period of a lot of stress, but we're also at a period of just a lot of opportunities that all of us can actually create the future of.
I think everybody's made some really good points. There's a couple things that I want to touch on. So I wasn't at USAID for as long as the folks here, but in my time there, I did notice two things. One was that a lot of folks liked what they were doing and the work that they were doing, but there were a lot of like institutional policies and procedures and ways of doing things that they were not happy about, and they were grinning and bearing it because like of the impact that they felt like they were having. And that's not there anymore. So whatever happens next, whatever comes up next, like they will be able to kind of make those changes, right? And I think also there's this one of the things. So my first job at USAID, I was just I was a logistics guy. I just did expense reports and sent people off to countries that I was really jealous of going that I wasn't able to go to. But I learned that nobody outside of USAID really in the United States really knew what it was doing, knew about it at all. And actually in Congress, there had been like this thing where USAID wasn't allowed to talk to Americans about their mission. And that's why it was so easily cut last year, like destroyed last year because of a storytelling issue, right? And I feel like now, folks who are working in humanitarian aid, international development, peace building, this is a time where they need to find their voice and actually like lean into that and say, hey, yes, like I liked what you said, like, Saul, you're from Michigan, right? Like I'm from Georgia. People from Georgia don't know what's going on, right? They care about their Georgia Bulldogs, right? But like, they will if you actually are able to bring it to them in the words they speak. I always thought it was interesting. So Americans are historically very charitable people, right? We give tons of money to charities all over the place, our church, our basketball teams, all these things. But like when it comes to like the budget of USAID, it was like half a penny. But if we knew what was going on, we'd actually probably be really proud. But because we were never to tell those stories, I think. Anyway, I think that's where we could kind of start moving forward. I mean, I will say like it is bleak out there. Definitely. I mean, everybody in this room knows that, but there are opportunities. I have actually, I did a bunch of research. I talked at the NASPA conference back in December, and it's been interesting to me because in some cases, there's been these big multinational corporations who have realized that international issues are actually hitting their bottom line. Like if they're dealing with like, even if it's things like PayPal, like they have to know about these international like financial rules and like things like that. And so like they have like a vested interest in having countries be stable and like understanding all of these kind of things. So I think there's opportunities that for folks in this space that maybe take a different shape than what they could have before.
Can you hear it working? Okay. I want to hone in a little bit more, and this is a great context everybody set up, in thinking about most everyone is here because their careers have gone through a change. And kind of the world of truths has changed. The realities have changed. If we looked at 2024 and we looked at 2026, when it comes to the world of international development, those two worlds can't recognize 2026 and remember 2024 was such a different world. And all of this work, development, peace building, humanitarians, require people on the ground doing the work. What truths have changed now? What's different about developing a career and looking for meaningful work? I'll start with Liz because she's looking at me.
So I'm an adjunct professor here at the Carter School, and I have this one student. She's getting I'm teaching policy writing and how do you better communicate these issues, and she's doing a double degree. It's graduate with the Carter School and social work. And so they have to pick a topic and write on it. And she's like, well, in the big, beautiful bill, they have made social work, nursing, and a couple like non-professional, and they can't get, they're capped at a certain point of funding. And that's a conflict problem. And I was like, really? And I was like, okay, tell me more. And I was skeptical at first. And she convinced me that social workers and nurses, so many of them are on the front lines of community work, schools, identifying, vulnerable people. And it's a field that's already struggling. And you just took away, it's just going to be that much harder. And this is a conflict problem in the United States, especially at the time of rising instability, political violence, and conflict in the United States. And I go, that's amazing. Like, she got it. And how you then can integrate this work in other fields. You mentioned the private sector. Talk about the private sector, right? And you can also, and I know people don't like to do this, but there are some things that the Trump administration is doing that you're like, okay, that's a good idea. Their focus on private sector and prosperity and how to, how that is critical in countries, not always agreeing how they did it or they're doing it, but they are saying some things and you're like, okay, I can get behind that. And so I think you're going to have to think more kind of outside the box. And I know people hate that term, but how you can integrate this work into maybe another sector, I think is really important. It's not, it's kind of AI proof in that regard, right? Because, it's something that is human contact a lot of times too. But I really, for now, maybe that's where you have to go. How can you integrate this into another sector? I know people who are like, oh, I have to go work for a defense contractor. Okay, well, you're going to do that now and learn from that. But at the same time, be volunteering with different organizations. And I know a lot of people who have gotten their jobs, they were volunteering with organizations, and then that's how they got their job. So, you have to do what you have to do to make a living, right, to survive. But at the same time, how can you integrate this work into that sector and how you can stay relevant. One of the big projects that we're really focusing on right now too is how do we keep people in this sector? Because we don't want you to go, right? We need, and there was a lot of brain drain. So how do we keep people in the sector, understanding, staying on top, building your skills so that, when opportunities and when we can rebuild, that you're there. So I think that, I don't want to sit up here and be so like naive but I also, this is a little bit of a pep talk. There is an incredible book out there right now called Hope for Cynics, a neuroscientist, Jamil Ziki. And he talks about the fact that it's understandable to be very cynical right now, but it actually deepens social problems when you're cynical. And, again, not asking people to be naive, but how do you rebalance your view so that we can help build the world that we truly want? Nobody's coming to save any of this stuff. We have to do it ourselves. And so that's kind of my call to action to everyone.
Do y'all mind if I jump in? So I love that, actually. Like, as a cynic, like, I really appreciate, I need to read that book. So I have a question for everybody in the room. Who do y'all think was USAID's biggest, like, donor? They're like their biggest, like, partner, like, donor. Or that, like, they're like I worked at the PSC Hub, and I'm trying to remember what the name of this thing was. But Coca-Cola was one of their biggest partners. Coca-Cola, like, was huge. They didn't realize this for a long time, and they finally got a system that they could actually track all the money. But like Coca-Cola and these other huge multinational corporations did a lot, like, helped support a lot of this work. And going back to Liz's point, right? Like, you may have to go into other places, but I think actually by going to those other places, you actually expand. It's not like, oh, we have to, like, stay in the sector and protect ourselves. You expand the viewpoint, right? Like, I've worked for a lot of defense contractors. I worked for like 3 of them, and I've picked up a lot of, I not that my goal is to go and do that stuff. I'm not a big fan, but like, that work was also kind of needed. I saw them as like public servants who needed some support, and I worked in HR, so it wasn't like I'm helping build bombs. But like, if you can find other ways to make an impact and other places to bring your perspective, and you can help influence the way that those companies and those organizations and those offices and those people work and see the world. And you're, it's not like you're betraying your values or anything like that. You're actually like living them, and you're bringing them forward. And maybe you're making a little bit better of a paycheck, maybe than you were working at a nonprofit or something like that. I mean, it's I don't know. Everything is still very much in flux, right? Yes, I would say, like, the fallout. We're living in the fallout, and we have to figure out, like, what's next. And certain things are changing, and things are shaping, but we're not sure, right? You just got to be really flexible about it.
Something that I think for me remains like a solid truth is there is an increasing kind of necessity for people who are comfortable navigating ambiguity and navigating uncertainty, gray areas, discomfort. I think last summer I took I attended a workshop actually through Georgetown School of Foreign Service. They had the Pivot with Purpose program, and one of the presenters had to sit down and write down like a list of like, what are all the things that you're really good at? And I realized over the course of that workshop that all the jobs I had up to that point had been sitting in between 2 or 3 other teams to help translate what each other was doing and kind of functioning as like a fulcrum or a pivot for those teams. It's like, oh, okay, that's interesting. I never thought about my career in that way of like helping other people inside my organization and outside to become more comfortable with discomfort and more comfortable with not having all the answers to everything, but being part of the solution to find the answers to XYZ things. And so, like, as I was thinking holistically and creatively about whatever the next stage of my career was going to be, I ended up taking 3 or 4 different consultancies last year that would all kind of help to solve is the wrong word, but like to account for a different skill I wanted to learn or kind of a deficiency, quote unquote, in the skills I was lacking that helped me ultimately get to the job I have now. And during my interview, I was able to specifically call on, yeah, like I did this one job for 3 months that helped me get this one skill I didn't have before. But I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't gone through and just kind of reflected and had some time amongst all of the chaos of the moment just to sit with my own thoughts and sit with myself and think through, like, what am I really good at? What do I not want to do at all? And what are the small things that I need to do to help me get there eventually?
Could I just do a quick 2-finger on that? Your point on uncertainty, I'm having trouble saying that word, is there's research behind this. And the research is that uncertainty makes our brains work harder. And analyzing, predicting, recalibrating, it's actually unpleasant to our brains. And uncertainty is more distressing to us than negative certainty. That's crazy, right? And that's why people fall back into patterns and habits. And so our brain is wired not just to avoid harm, but to avoid not knowing. And so the greatest thing about our brain is once you know something, you can understand that and you can change the way that you think. And so thank you, because that is such it's a great story of how you redid this, or thinking about being comfortable sitting in uncertainty.
I'm not sure I have too much to add. The thing about sitting in a panel is by the time I listen to everybody, I forget what I was going to say. So maybe I'll just kind of build on the whole ambiguity and complexity, which is to say, maybe I think you asked, what is a new truth? Which I assumed means, okay, what has changed? What is it that we're facing now that we weren't before? And again, the more I think about this, even though it feels like the change has been so abrupt in the past year, if you look back, there were signs of change that was coming. And so the one thing I would say is reading the tea leaves, really being perceptive, paying attention to the context so that we are not as surprised as we are. Because again, if you go back the past 10, 15 years in our country, the way the country was changing and the way our careers was changing, it was kind of there. And so I think what happens is that kind of going back to this, becoming comfortable with ambiguity, becoming comfortable with just lack of certainty, building just really a lot of resilience to that, because that is really what our lives are. That is what the context is. The one thing actually, as I was also thinking is, in some ways, what is relatively new is that the different pieces on the chessboard or on the risk board, if you ever played Risk, are shifting. And so those people who consider themselves, the donors are not necessarily donors anymore. Those who were the humanitarian workers supporting others are not necessarily, because their own countries are becoming uncertain. So what's happening is that the new truth is perhaps that how quickly things are shifting, so that, for example, I think we've talked about working in, you said Georgia, or a lot of what we thought we were going to go do in other countries are now the type of work we actually have to do in our own country. We have to do peace building in our own country. We have to do development in our own country. We have to do conflict management and conflict resolution in our own country. So I think for me, the biggest change relatively has been that where we actually are going to do this work has really shifted. And so, and again, maybe just turn it to a positive. If you're looking for a job, there's a whole lot of stuff to do here at home, because a lot of this work actually really is needed in some of the communities.
Thank you. To me, that was really helpful. And I had a professor that once said, I didn't take the advice, but he said there should never be just a peace builder. You're like a peace builder attached to something, some sort of other career. And I just did the same degrees over and over. But I think that's really relevant to what y'all were saying of the uncertainty, the ambiguity. The other side of that to me is creativity. And you can start seeing, okay, there's Hurricane Helene. That's a disaster scenario. Okay, there's people getting kidnapped. That's a conflict. Like there's things happening around us, and there's industries, there's HR, whatever it is that you're tapping into. I think we need to be very creative about, these are not wasted skills. Like it can feel really demoralizing, but I don't think this education is wasted at all. And yeah, conflict is not a job that's gonna run out, unfortunately. So I just encourage the creativity aspect. I'm gonna jump down a little bit further. So fast forward 5 years, what do these fields look like to you? Whoever can start.
Okay. We're trying to rebuild that right now. And it's not going to look the same, nor should it, because Sepida, you hit it right on the head. The systems that we were working in, were created in the 80s and the 90s, and the world looks very different now. And conflict looks very different now. And, there's AI in conflict, and, we need to also be working on nuclear issues. The last START treaty just ended. Right now, the US and Russia, we don't have any nuclear arms treaties. So I think that there's, the sector is also changing and coming back to where we were. The private sector is going to be huge on this. Another company that cares very much about these issues is Nestle. Why does Nestle care? Chocolate, right? Their coca plants. And this is a Democrat and a Republican problem. We got President Biden to talk about conflict prevention. Guess what? He didn't really care. And his administration didn't care. So this is a bipartisan problem. And I think the Domestic Policy Council got sick and tired of me calling them up to say, okay, we have conflict in the United States. What are we doing? We'll just, we have our infrastructure bill. Like, I'm very critical of a lot of the things that they did. So this is a bipartisan issue that we need to be pushing forward in, any political campaign. They'll tell you a lot, you don't want to campaign on foreign policy. Well, I kind of think it had a big impact in the last campaign, and I think moving forward it is going to have a lot of impact. And again, it's how you prevent, how do you deal with violence? So that, I think, and again, that's what we're working right now at AFP. How do we rebuild that system, transform that system so that we are working with countries in partnership? I mean, that was what the Global Fragility Act said. It was only 4 countries in one region, but it was really trying to get at that prevention piece. And then how do you make sure, and I felt the peacebuilding community, myself included, very insular, very wonky, very technical. After the Ebola outbreak in the DRC, I asked a lot of health and humanitarian folks to come in, and I was like, what are we doing wrong here that we couldn't work together? And, because they were killing doctors and burning down health clinics because they were in the middle of a conflict, right? And they were like, okay, you guys all you do is point your finger at us and tell us all the things we're doing wrong. You don't tell us how we can change. And you sit around and talk with PhDs and all this wonky language. And so, that was my point, is like we had to look inside ourselves and say, okay, what are we doing wrong? And then more, I think just as importantly, is get Americans to care about these issues. We have to, right? So that people demand it, that they, at political campaigns, they're like, wait, what are you doing about this? And, I tell people you have more agency and you have more power than you think. I mean, that's what we were telling people all over the world, right? And so we have to demand it. And again, a bipartisan issue, Democrats and Republicans.
Okay, so the question was, how do we see things in 5 years from now? So I think, again, like I like to go backwards before I can go forward. And I actually see 5 years from now to be a place of more uncertainty, more stress, more conflict. One of the things kind of a mantra I've had for myself, some of you, if you do yoga or if you do meditation, becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable. We went from a world that was bipolar for decades, and then we went to a world where we were basically leading it, unipolar, and now we are moving more and more to a multipolar world, which more and more countries are gaining strength. More and more of them are building their militaries. At the same time, more and more non-government organizations, institutions, including private sector, are gaining strength. And so who runs the world is not necessarily governments anymore. It's a lot of billionaires who own these huge companies. And so all of these things are shifting very quickly. And one of the things actually I was going to say at the end of the last question about conflict is just human nature. We're always going to have conflict. I mean, we barely get along with our siblings growing up, or with our mothers and fathers, or with our neighbors. So what I see 5 years from now, actually, unfortunately, is the world is shifting more rapidly. The alliances are shifting. The strength of countries, who is more stronger, what strength means is shifting. So I think for me, 5 years from now, I see a world that has more conflict, is more uncertain. And again, I think that's why it's really important to keep focusing on these kind of concepts of then, okay, what does peace building mean in that kind of a context? What does conflict resolution mean in that kind of a context? Because for the longest time, we as the United States have seen ourselves as the peace builders. We're the ones who go to other places. Now that's not necessarily us anymore. China is stepping in. I mean, Pakistan is stepping in to resolve the issues between, Iran and the US. So I think things are going to, and unfortunately, as time goes by, changes happen more rapidly. So the rate of change becomes more and more rapid. It becomes more exponential. And so, and again, I guess I'd like to throw out the issue and then end with a good note, which is these types of conversations and these type of thinking becomes even more important.
For the last two, I'm going to add a part B. If you can add what it looks like in 5 years and what you think that means for people developing their careers right now.
Jumping off of Sepeta's point, I do think also that it's going to be there's going to be more conflict and chaos. I don't know what that's going to look like. None of us here do, right? 5 years is a long time, and change happens like this these days, right? But I think also what she said was like the skills, the knowledge, the discussions we're having now, and what you're learning in your programs and what you did in your past careers, if you already had a career in this space, are so much more needed, right? But you are going to have to be more flexible. You're going to have to like lean into different skills, different things that like maybe you weren't comfortable with now, but like you'll have to, because otherwise, I mean, like, so I work for a tech firm, and if I didn't, I wasn't super interested in AI stuff 2 years ago, 3 years ago, but like I would be, if I didn't start learning it now, I'd be like the person in 1980 who decided he didn't want to use a computer, right? And if you can learn how to work in these different spaces, like Saul, you said, like that's where your niche is. Like you work in between groups to help them understand each other and understand these concepts and like learn from each other. That's where we need to be, and that's where everybody in this room can be. Now, what all those spaces and rooms look like in 5 years, I have no idea.
I think I'm actually really optimistic, not necessarily about global affairs, but I think when it comes to the impact of the dissolution of USAID in its previous state and what it means specifically for the U.S., I think some people will leave the development sector forever, right? And they may transition to roles inside the U.S. to help U.S. society, hopefully, deal with our own decades of conflict, centuries of conflict that are unresolved here, that need the skills that many of us have been applying overseas. There's a lot of work to be done here. And then I think the other half to quarter may go back into whatever the next stage of development work looks like in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, but we won't be operating under the same set of rules, and we are actively creating those rules now, right? And so there will be spaces for maybe some of us in this room, maybe others in other rooms, to help be part of the teams making those rules. But it's like in the policy world that I sit in, it's like either you're in the room and you have a voice, or you're not in the room and you say nothing, right? And so it'll just be a way of finding a way to weasel ourselves into those rooms to ensure that the future looks like how we want it to look like.
Something I think then it becomes even more important to look at your career more as building blocks, and different types of building blocks. And one building block might be extremely different from the other ones. Like, this is pretty much what I've done in my career for the past, few decades. I kind of did one thing, and then I thought, okay, this would be interesting. And then as time went by, you start connecting them, even if they didn't necessarily make sense at the time. And I think now it becomes even more critical for all of you to start thinking about it as these different, sometimes very varied, very disparate building blocks. Try this, try that, which also means that if you have something in mind right now that where you want your career to be, or this is what you want to do, keep yourself open to opportunities that you never thought you may actually want to follow, because taking one opportunity, which may have nothing to do with what you thought you were going to do, is something that might actually really help you 5 years, 3 years, 10 years down the line. Because again, things are changing so fast. The kind of skills that are needed are changing so fast that just really being able to pivot very quickly from one thing to another and just eventually pulling them all together is going to become even more critical, especially if, we have no idea what the world is going to look like a year from now. You hear all sorts of different things about, okay, AI is really going to kill 50% of lower level, entry level jobs in the next 3 years. Then you hear somebody say, well, no, it's not going to be. Everybody's going to be great. So we just really don't know. And so building these blocks is going to be really helpful as you go along.
Kind of about that, and it's to be able to be flexible and to like learn these skills and get into this stuff. You have to be very conscious of taking care of yourself, right? Like I've been unemployed before, and there were plenty of times where I was networking, and like there might have been a cool opportunity to pursue something, and I was in a bad headspace, and I was talking about all this negative stuff, and like that needed to get out, but like that shut doors. That I wasn't being able to present myself in the way that would have made people be open to speaking with me or something. And the world, like there's so much going on. I understand, but like you need to find ways to find that kind of balance, whether it's yoga or hanging out with your friends, going to church, whatever it is, right? Because if you're not able to be centered in yourself in that kind of way, you are gonna get kind of stuck.
But can I just put this sorry, just to put it in perspective, I have to be realistic, optimist, realistic. It's not like we haven't been here before. My grandmother was born in 1902 in the United States. The person that I've loved the most, besides my children, she was born without the right to vote in this country. She lived through World War I, the Great Depression, the Spanish flu, World War II. So, and I'm not saying that, we have been very fortunate. The 1990s were like one of the, there were problems there, but one of the most peaceful eras, right? And into the aughts. So we know a lot more about conflict. We know a lot more how to resolve it. So, we have to know that we have seen a lot of this before, and we have a lot better skills right now. So, it's up to us.
One last round of questions, and then we're going to ask our audience if they want to pose some questions to our panel. So, kind of moving into, I think, an optimistic potential kind of phase. And I want folks here to walk away tonight with one thing that they should be doing that they're not doing now. And maybe something that isn't so obvious. So if you come back and say, do more networking, I know that's what we're all doing. Maybe be more precise than that, I don't know. But each of you kind of tell us one thing that you think this audience could go home and do tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, or maybe at 9 p.m., that they're not doing now, that will make a difference in advancing this meaningful work that we're all called to do.
So I think when we are going through difficult times, it's very tempting and easy to isolate ourselves. And something that I've learned over the past 16 months is that, I have a village, right? I have people here in DC and around the world who really, really care about me, and I really, really care about them. And they are the only way that I made it through the past 16 months, on the other side, right? And there were times when my friends didn't hear from me for 2 weeks, and oh wait, Saul, that's weird. We see you every 2 or 3 days, and they organized a meal train and brought me food and let's go out and get ice cream together. It's on me. Let's do something, right? And so I would say it sounds very hokey, but having people who are in your core and are really there for you is so important and helps build the resiliency that we all need to make it through this next stage. And I'll say again, I grew up first generation college student, grew up very, very poor, and because of that background, my relationship to my family is very, very close because of that, because we went through something awful together, right? And so that's a muscle that I've tried over my life to maintain and build. And again, we'll just say resist the temptation to isolate. It's really easy. It's easy to get into a dark place that way, and you don't need to be there.
Okay, I'll go next. I have no idea what you all are already doing, and I assume you're already doing a whole lot. So I can't necessarily say what it is you're not doing that you should do. But I would say that you all just really have to do what's right for you. I'm sure you go to a lot of panels where a lot of us tell you what to do, but I think at the end of the day, it's just really a matter of doing what feels right and, what makes sense to you. I actually asked my daughter before I came here, what is it that you do? Because she's also doing a lot of interviews and she's sending out a lot of resumes. And she said, what did she say? Something about basically conserving your energy and being very thoughtful about where you put your energy. And because, you know, we also feel like, okay, you got to go out there, you got to network with everybody, you got to send out 100 resumes, you know, a month. And, you know, what she actually told me is not every resume and every cover letters requires the same level of effort. Not every interview requires the same level of effort. And so just, you know, really being thoughtful about what works for you, how much energy you're putting into it. I think similar to also what you were talking about a little bit. Just kind of, and the other thing is, you know, these type of situations allow you to get to know yourself. So also give yourself the opportunity to know yourselves a little bit better as you're going through these types of stressful, these type of situations. Just really check in with yourself. Okay, how does this job make me feel when I read the kind of the explanation? Does it make me feel like, wow, I really want to do that, or not really? Now, again, if you need a job, you need a job, but just allow this process, as difficult as it is, to also help you get to know yourself, get to know your own reactions, get to know kind of like your own reactions to these type of things, because also it allows you to grow, and so also see it as a period of growth.
So similar to what you were saying, actually, I was gonna say just do less. Like give your there's so many things going on. Steve and I were talking about like FOMO of like there's events, there's networking, there's everything you could do, there's all these webinars you could go to, there's a million jobs you could apply to. Give yourself the grace and the permission to do less. I put myself on a news diet like in 2016. God, that was the best thing that happened to me. I'm really sad that dam broke last year. It's really annoying to be back in this doom scrolling hole.
I'm on that diet now.
But like, you know, do what you need to do to get through, but don't like kill yourself trying to learn everything, follow everything, get involved with everything. Whether it's family and friends, you know, like whatever you need, but it's okay to just be.
Okay, well, I'm Gen X, so I'm like, do more. And one of the things that I have to learn, and I've been trying all my life, is to say no more sometimes. So I have 2 daughters. They're twins. One daughter is killing it out there. She's doing, you know, she's working, you know, she's at Cambridge and getting her PhD. And I have another daughter who's struggling in New York City. And when I see the difference, my daughter who's doing well, she's open. She asks for advice. She comes to us and wants advice. She listens. She's open to possibilities. She doesn't just shut something down because she doesn't like it. My other daughter, you know, isn't really open to advice, isn't, you know, she's very rigid in her thinking, like, I want to do this. And if I don't do this, then, and so my best advice is stay open, think about what's possible, be curious, and join things. Rotary. It's not your grandfather's Rotary anymore. They're a member of the Alliance for Peacebuilding. A little known fact, they helped eradicate polio, but they also are one of the biggest in peace building, right? And then guess who Rotary people are? They're some of, you know, the most established people in your community that would help you network as well. So think of things like that you might not normally think about, and educate yourself, right? Again, you know, learning, if you want to work in the United States, learning what's really driving the conflict here. Learn what, you know, organizations are doing, not doing, what's working, what's not working, so that you walk into an interview being curious, but also saying, you know, this is what I'm passionate about, and this is what I'm, you know, what I've done and what I'm looking at. So, I mean, again, that's really some of my best advice. And I mean, just when you asked the question, I was thinking of my 2 daughters, and I hope they don't see this video, but, but yeah.
So summarize or paraphrase, identify your village, lean on your village, know your village, right? I think it's important, right? My mic's, is it on? Okay. Did you get that? Know your village, lean on your village, identify your village is there for you. FOMO, I like that. Fear of missing out. Don't let that run your life, right? I think a lot of people are kind of running after the things that they're missing when it makes no difference if they miss it or not, maybe, right? It's not that significant. So sometimes being less engaged is okay. Stay curious, right? There's a lot out there to draw us that we can think about, engage in, apply our skills to, apply our thoughts to, and that leads us to creativity, right? I always am struck by the intersectionality of things that we don't really recognize there's an intersectionality of. I always would tell my students that if you looked at climate change and migration 30 years ago, you would never have thought there was a connection between the two because we didn't look at it that way. But now we know there's such a strong connection. Curiosity means looking at those intersectionalities. And then conserve yourself, conserve your things for things that really count, right? Be strategic, be thoughtful in what you do and what you apply to. All really, I think, really important advice, and maybe not, no one here said, add more friends to your LinkedIn, rewrite your resume 5 times. Those things may have their role, but we want to maybe think in a different context at times. Now I'm interested in hearing from you all, questions that you may have. I'm going to bring the microphone over here. I'm hoping that I'll get a question or two, or our panel get a question or two, things that you're thinking about. So I want to just walk up here. It's going to be easier if I bring this over here. So come up here and join me if you've got a question or a thought or even an observation, please. When you come up here, identify who you are. That's helpful also.
Thank you all for coming here and speaking about this today. My name is Anna Goodman. I was a Foreign Service officer serving in West Africa Regional Mission, working on conflict and violence prevention issues. And so one thing that's been on my mind, and you've all mentioned in different ways, shapes, or forms, is how do we communicate peace building, the importance of it to the American people? As much as we're trying to talk to the Hill, to our policymakers who do really understand how important this issue is, how do we get people on the ground to know how important it truly is to their own safety and well-being? As someone who didn't even know this field existed until I was doing the rounds for grad school in my mid-20s. Thank you.
I can take it. That is an incredible question. It's getting easier because Americans are seeing conflict in their own backyard. So, it was always hard to say, oh, well, in Senegal, or, they couldn't picture that. And, and you can't always just say, okay, this is what's wrong, this is happening. Oh, you don't want that conflict or virus to come here. And that's what we're working on at AFP. So what's the solution? So what can you do at your community level? Or, how do you get involved so that you're having some kind of impact? And you're starting, I think maybe why I can be so optimistic is because I'm seeing what everybody is doing, even just in the United States. So many organizations have popped up, so many programs are popping up, and people are doing the hard work. And so I think, so that's one thing, but yeah, we got to translate this better. in a way that is, smart, concise, pithy, and that's we're trying to do that. But I'm telling you, it's hard. We're really, really struggling with it, and partly because we we've had, we come out of, these schools and these programs, and, we're trying to translate it. I mean, I don't think my mom ever really knew what I did, right? And so I think that's, but understanding the research, how you can get people to think about this, what's working, what's not working. We're starting to work with this one organization called Frameworks, and they're a nonprofit, but they're actually like, oh, what do Americans really think about this? One term that both Democrats, Independents, Republicans could understand is like bridge building. And I'm not saying like, a dialogue program, but it's like, oh, you have a bridge and you have to work and you have to connect it, and you have to give it maintenance, and it's something that you have to work on all the time. And so I think that trying to understand that language, Sepida, you reminded me of something. Remember the democracy, what was the tagline USAID, like, I don't want to say democracy works or democracy, what was it? Democracy delivers. You're like, there was an organization that was like trying to work with USAID, like, actually, that's like maybe an old phrase. It's not right now. So again, it's pushing back against that status quo. And when I'm saying democracy delivers, I'm saying even globally. So come work with us.
Thing I would just add kind of would be avoiding the temptation to be super rosy-eyed about the development sector as a whole, especially in communicating to a domestic U.S. audience for whom maybe liberal internationalism actually didn't benefit them in a good way. Maybe they lost their jobs because their jobs were outsourced to another country, right? So I think there's a way to talk about the importance of having robust international systems and humanitarian aid work, but without I think misconstruing or lying about the total positive impacts of this work. It was a mixed bag for a lot of people, and we need to be careful about navigating that nuance with the care that it needs.
I think one thing I would add to what you said is we talk a lot about how do we talk about something. We ask a lot of questions about, well, how do we explain something to the American people? How do we explain this to populations elsewhere? And we don't talk as much about how do we listen? How do we ask questions? How do we then put ourselves in this mindset of these people? Because so much of the work we've done is we go to a country, we go to a community, we come in there with, okay, this is what we're going to tell them, this is what we're going to do for them. But we don't really talk as much about what are the questions we're going to ask them? How are we going to listen to them? What do we ask them about what they want? What do they want to know from us? And I think we really have to shift that perspective because, frankly, that actually has not served us well. I think a lot of what you're saying is because we went to a lot of places and we talked to people, we talked at them, we tried to teach them. We said, let me explain to you. People do not need to be explained to. People seriously need to be listened to. You need to engage with communities. And I mean, ultimately, what is conflict resolution? What is peace building? It's bringing people together. It's bringing them together, creating a space, creating a platform so they can come in. They can talk to each other in a safe way where they know they're going to be listened to, truly listened to, without being told what to do. And we really have not been doing that well. We've been doing it, but we have not been doing it as well as we should have. And I think, I said in the beginning that we have been moving in a direction for a while that we may not have noticed. But if you really paid attention, you would see we had lost a lot of the habit of listening, respecting, humility, And again, if there is any room for change right now, if there's any opportunity, is to really check with ourselves and say, hey, has this been working for us? Not really. Not really. Because I walked into a lot of communities where they were really not receptive to me being there. And I had to spend a lot of time sitting there and say, okay, you talk to me. Floor is yours. Tell me what you want. Tell me what you think. So I would say, listen. We really have lost the habit of listening. And I think seriously regaining that is going to be helpful to us.
Any other questions? Get one question in before. Naomi, you have any more questions? Maybe. Oh, you have a question? Please come on up. Take this question, then we'll close out.
Well, first of all, thank you all for this great panel. So I heard some of you say companies like Coca-Cola and Nestle. So my question is, how do you dive into the situation that many of these companies that are also funders, they're involved with privatizing water sources or affecting communities. But right now, their private companies sometimes can be like the greatest funders right now. So how do you dive that situation? Thank you.
I mean, I think that at a certain point, like every big organization is going to have its like not so great parts, right? And you're just going to have to like, I'm not saying compromise or anything like that, but like at a certain, like you can make it better or you can stay out, like go choose to be in a different organization or something. Like for example, so like I worked in defense contracting for 5 years. I've worked for a couple different organizations, and I drew a line. Like I was like, I will work on HR programs because like I have soldiers that were my family. Both of my grandfathers are in the Navy, and like I see them as public servants who did a lot of really good work, and their HR stuff is all messed up, and like they deserve to at least know how many days off they have and whatever kind of paycheck they're going to get. Do I want to know what's going on like on that contract where they're building bombs and stuff? No. And like it was a weird way for me to work, but like I did do good work and I supported a lot of people and I had a good impact. And when it comes to these big organizations like Coke and Nestle, things like there's going to be parts that they're not doing great stuff, but if you're inside, you can try and make a difference, right? But if you're outside, it's harder to. I know that's a little kind of, maybe that's a little naive, but I don't know that there's any organizations out there that are in the private sector that don't have some kind of like black mark on them somewhere.
And can I just say something really quickly? Multiple things can be true at the same time. And we, even as people living in the United States, it is hard to sit with that uncertainty and, but just remember that, people, even who vote for somebody else or live in different communities, they have a perspective and they, Sepida, I love what you were saying about listening.
I think what I would add is just building on your many things can be true at the same time. You also need different types of people to do different things for different objectives. I mean, all of us at some point in our lives have to make a deal with the devil and do something that we may not necessarily want to do. But also at the same time, sometimes we choose to be inside an organization and change it from within, and every organization is going to need that. But also every organization is going to need people from the outside to push them to make change. So I think as we go through our careers, we have to decide at any point in time, do we want to be in the inside making the change or do we want to be on the outside making the change? And having been someone who was in the government for a long time, trying to make a lot of changes, I so appreciated people who were on the outside trying to push me to make those changes. So I think we just really gonna need people to make those type of changes, do the right thing. And I think we just all have to decide at one point, do I want to be inside at this moment? Do I want to be on the outside at this moment? But I have to say what you say, I mean, a lot of these things drive me personally crazy. I'm like, why are you doing this? Do you not understand the long-term impact of this? And And I think we're going to need people to push from the inside and people to push from the outside to make those changes, because those changes really are necessary.
I think I'm someone who's tried to build my career of being someone on the outside, kind of yelling in. So I've always done like advocacy policy work with nonprofits, and that's kind of the niche I've kind of honed for myself. And as I was doing my own job search, I faced a similar thing of like, I know that like Coke and Pepsi and Nestle and all these big all these big multinationals, they deal a lot with like really complicated supply chain issues, and there are lots of those supply chain issues are in places that are experiencing conflict already. Those companies are sometimes the mitigators of those conflicts. And so I ultimately decided not to apply for any jobs with those companies for myself, but that was a decision I made on my own. And that meant that at one point I had a short-term contract with an external like third-party monitoring company that was kind of a watchdog for a mining company. And so like that was like I only knew that really existed because I had taken this kind of principled stance of like I don't want to work for Coke, and so what's going to be my little niche instead? And it came across this third-party compliance stuff instead that like ended up being fulfilling and helped me gain a skill I didn't have before. And so I think again, like having this creativity as part of your job search and career is really useful.
I'm struck by something that Sepida said, reminded me, we think about selling. Huh? I would say you could rent your soul to the devil for a short-term period of time. And when you rent, you sign a lease. So you have to negotiate the lease with the devil of exactly what you're going to do and have a very short term. And then you get out of the contract. It's different than selling your soul to the devil. So think about renting your soul to the devil if you need to. I'm going to let the last word go to Naomi. Anything that you want to add before we close it out?
Oh, that was so interesting. I think I can connect the last two questions because, yeah, I have a hard time with that question. And I think listening is so important because I assume we're all trying to do no harm. And it's easy to just go, oh, hands off. I used to do organizing in Harrisonburg, and the person most interested in housing people we were working on housing was the like chicken factory owner that probably wasn't paying their workers enough, but they wanted to support housing. So we worked with them. There's no permanent enemies, no permanent allies, they would say. So I think you got to get your hands dirty, but you have to keep your eyes on who are you actually trying to help, and are you doing more harm than good? Are you letting some donation dollars in while all of this is getting destroyed? Or I don't know. Y'all know better. Y'all been doing it longer, but I think that's a really interesting question. And yeah, I'm just really grateful for y'all sharing your wisdom with us tonight. And I hope y'all gleaned something helpful. And I don't know how we're kind of over time in general, but I'm sure everyone's really welcome for more questions and more chatting and sharing their information. Yeah.
So I want to thank our panel, Naomi, Liz, Saul, Sepida, Joe, everyone that put something into this, the Biosophical Institute. And just to remind everybody that tomorrow we are online. So if you want to join us online, see Emily, but you can also go to our website, and I think I don't know if you can still register on our website, www.foragecenter.org. Thank you all for being here. I hope that you enjoyed getting to know one another, engaging in the networking bingo, at least finding out a little bit more about where you should be in your own space, in your own direction going forward. I am optimistic also. And have a great evening and a safe journey back home. Thank you.